Welcome back to Exhaling South African World Lead History Podcast. I'm your host, Homotsudibito, and I'm here with PN Vilagazi Muhammad Ali. Tate, how are you doing today?
Well, despite the few hiccups that we should not be talking about, yes, I'm alright.
That's great. I'm happy that you're alright. And I'm pretty much excited for today's episode because we're going to be touching on a very unknown topic, as we normally do, like in this podcast. Like, we uncover everything that has to do with history, theology, intergenerational topics between young people and old people. So if this is your first time listening to this episode, make sure to like and subscribe and share this episode with anybody that you know who could deem this valuable. So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about the Ethiopian movement's influence in world history. So many people might not be aware of the Ethiopian movement, and I would like Tate Vilagazi to give us a clear understanding on what exactly is the Ethiopian movement.
The Ethiopian movement is what was then called a socio-religio-political movement founded by our ancestors in specifically 1892.
Yes.
By a clergy person out of the Wesleyan Methodist Church called Nehemiah Tile.
Okay.
Nehemiah Tile, incidentally, had been a student of Makanda Ganele, whom the colonials and the Boers called Makanda the left-handed.
Okay.
And who was also a socio-religio political leader.
Okay.
And incidentally was of mixed blood origins. He had Khoi blood, he had Xhosa blood, he had Malay blood. And he was a fierce fighter.
Okay.
So Tile, within the Methodist Church, could have been some kind of a, very exuberant person.
Okay.
And had a lot of following, and who later became a rebel. And let me tell you how he would have been regarded as a rebel by the colonizer missionary church.
Okay.
Tile had been a citizen of Tembuland.
Okay.
Of Tembuland. If I say Kwatembu, I'm Africanizing it, is still okay.
Okay.
In Xhosaland, in the whole region of Xhosaland.
Which is the Eastern Cape.
Which is what is called Eastern Cape in the language.
Okay.
And then this gentleman, and I don't like calling people gentlemen, it's in my tongue because it's English. This man, a man is a man, until you decide one day that he's a gentleman.
Okay.
But he was a warrior man.
Okay.
A warrior preacher man, like his mentor, from whom, even if he didn't mentor him directly, from whom he had learned and gleaned a lot of knowledge and fighting skills. So Nehemiah Tile decided to donate a cow to a ceremony that was going to mark the return of the Inkos's son from the initiation school, circumcision school.
And by then
he was a lead pastor.
Okay.
That's why he could even manage a car. Okay. It was not an ordinary pastor who could manage that. And of course, the nation would have expected that of him.
Was it related to the family or?
He was a Tembu himself. He was, there were many clans. He was one of them. Yes. So he was paying his tribute to the king out of his loyalty as a Xhosa, as a Xhosa man. Now, Tile was then expelled from the Wesleyan Methodist Church because the colonizers, the missionary white seniors of his, said he's a heathen. He participated in a heathen ceremony.
So these heathen ceremonies, was it just him purchasing the cow, or was it the whole whole, like him being involved in the
even just
in the
attending
ceremony.
there. The clergyman was supposed to be this nice man, with scriptures, ready for that letter, who wears a dog collar, who does not go to such ceremonies as such. Because the colonizers were already heavily threatened by Amakaba around those areas.
So what are
Amakaba were the sections of people who used to speak to smear their faces with a red ochre.
Okay, Amakaba were people who were participating in initiations.
Most horses participated in initiations.
Okay.
Even to the
Yes.
So they didn't want to have that taken away from them.
Yes.
But Amakaba defied the colonial powers openly in many ways.
From a religious perspective or in all areas?
In all areas. They hardly took their children to the Western schools. They also, depended on farming for a living.
Yes.
Subsistence farming, and had a lot of cattle.
Okay.
And they were people of their own in their own right, and so they did not need to be made soft by some white men coming into their land. So Tile was not one of them because he had an education. Yes. And some of those people then, their education could have been a standard 6 education, okay, which was a very powerful certificate.
Okay.
And Tile was expelled, and after he was expelled, he moved out of the Methodist Church with his congregation.
So everyone pretty much moved out of the church with him?
Well, yes.
Okay.
Not the whole Xhosa nation.
No, I mean like the people who were part of the church.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Others, as how the people are, others still remain in the church.
Of course.
Of the white people.
Yes.
But Peter was brave enough to move. So after he called this an Ethiopian movement, taking his cue from the Bible, Psalm 68:32, yes, which says, Ethiopia shall stretch her hands unto God, and also speak of minerals, rich minerals of Ethiopia, and so on. And by the way, people of the Bible times then, when they talk of Ethiopia, they're referring to the whole continent as it is, which was then also known, not yet known as African continent, yes, or Ethiopia, some names that I don't subscribe to. So, including the name African, by the way, I don't subscribe to that. This is the motherland, just human motherland, so far as I'm concerned. And that might not sound academic. Well, it's the funeral of those who don't agree with me. but then, Tile established the Ethiopian movement as a socio-religio-political movement, meaning that it will espouse issues of social and religious and political. Let's call governance. Yes. But they had to say political because they did not have an alternative to that. So it was in that area. And his influence spread like wildfire. So his influence started in the Xhosa land and it moved throughout South Africa, or throughout Africa. Let me say to start with how far it went. It came from all the way from Eastern Cape, through the Free State. Yes. The Orange Free State there. Yes. The old Transvaal came to Pretoria at Marabastad, where another young man had also walked out of the Kilnerton school where he was a teacher, called Mangena Mokodi, and he was a preacher also. Yes. Mangena Make Mokodi. And they clicked and started the Ethiopian movement. And others like Martha Dwani, coming out of the Anglican tradition, joined them. Yes. And others from Presbyterian, the Methodistas, the Sivinians, and Azibugos coming from all corners of denominations joined up with the Ethiopian movement. Ultimately, Africa, or this continent, had found a movement that is not going to be purely political or purely religious. It was going to be all-encompassing. And so they had found that, and that was power. No power had ever been seen in all of the world.
And this was particularly like an African church for African people.
It was not an African church. Let's stick to
movement,
African
particularly.
Movement. Yes.
I say church because of obviously like it encompasses like some extent like a level of religion and also social I could say like political issues. It covered also political issues as well. So I think movement then would be a better way to describe it. But I'm sure it taught people how to live according to even before.
So it was not a church. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah.
It was a movement.
Okay.
And it only took its name from the Bible.
Okay.
Because these people had been nurtured through the Bible.
Yes.
And they thought that was a powerful verse in the Bible.
Yes.
So why not espouse it? Huh? So they moved on with it to start the Ethiopian movement.
Yes.
And as I said, these were not university graduates or seminarians and so on. They were just, people who had pastored 6, most of them,
yes,
but who had very powerful minds and willpower. And they started the Ethiopian movement in 1892. But unfortunately, in that very space of time, in no time, Nehemiah Tile died. And as he died, then we cannot exclude that he could have been poisoned, because a lot of Africanists have been poisoned before.
Yes.
One example is Anton Libede, who was poisoned in his early 40s, but because he had made people like Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and them, he had been a powerful Africanist who was a student of and a protege of Priestley Kaseme.
Yes.
And in legal practice also worked with Priestley Kaseme. I'll come back to that. So you cannot say Tile, safely say Tile was not poisoned, but he died just at the inception of this movement, which was a great tragedy. So the honors to take it forward, the baton was passed to Mangena Mukoko. And who had more people from out of the Transvaal as well. And also to show that it was not tribalistic, they had to get a Mubedi person, because the Xhosa man who had led it had a vice president of sorts who was Mangena Mukoni. So Mangena Mukoni led the Ethiopian movement from that time. But in the meanwhile, the young people had moved from Kimberley to England to entertain Queen Victoria on anniversary of 70 years jubilee of the British being in South Africa, and they were singing there to Victoria, and almost turned into some coons dressed up in frocks of England, bow ties and stuff like that. Well, they were subjects of the English Empire, and as they were in England, some people from the US noticed them and took them to America. And they landed in America in places like Ohio in America.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So when they landed there, one of them was Charlotte McCracken, who is a renowned mother of liberation in Southern Africa. In Africa, okay.
Not just in South Africa, but
in Africa.
Throughout the entire continent.
In Africa, especially that he had come out of also the Ethiopian movement tradition.
Okay.
Oh yes. So, or influenced by it. He might not have directly been a member under Mukonde, but he was Mukonde's niece. He began to write to Mukonde about the Wilberforce University in Ohio that was established by the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Yes.
At the helm of this church, there was the Bishop Turner, Henry McLean Turner,
Yes.
and most of those fellows, young men and young women, enrolled at university and got themselves beautiful degrees.
Yes.
Most of them had BD, DD.
So it was not just Charlotte
No,
alone.
not just Charlotte.
Okay.
Charlotte was more fiesty. We talk with big, honchos like Bishop Turner.
Okay.
And discuss that stuff with them. So Bishop Turner, who was the vice president of the American Colonial Society, took advantage of Charlotte. He said, but Charlotte also was not just impressionable. She wanted education to come to her motherland, especially to South Africa.
So which is when they started in Everton?
Before they started.
Okay.
That's long before they started. Actually, like you are saying, the Americans had no program of education. They were just coming to colonize people, tell them, just like white people.
Yes.
By the way, Bishop Turner was a mulatto, a fairer complexion, colored person, like what you call the Cape colors in the post-apartheid era. So he was a vice president of the American Colonial Society. He had been to Mexico. He had been to many Southern America countries, Brazil, trying to establish the Amy Church.
Yeah.
He failed, fled. And I don't think he ever tried Jamaica, because Jamaica was self-liberating.
Yes.
And they would not have taken whatever stuff he was bringing. But then Bishop Turner said, Charlotte, write to your uncle and let's see what we can do together.
Okay.
And Charlotte wrote to the uncle, and the uncle was very much impressed. And you can imagine young men and women coming back home with degrees of sorts, So, of all sorts, as a matter of fact. So, Charlotte wrote to Mangana Mukonde through also her sister Kate Makaya, who was also in somewhere in Libua.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Which is where she's from originally.
Yes. And then Mukonde wrote back and said, Charlotte, can you arrange for us to come and meet those Americans? They were very much impressed.
Okay.
So Mukonde's heart was now softened towards religion again.
Okay.
Religion per se.
Yes.
To be within the strictures of religion.
Okay.
He was no more that broad person in the Ethiopian.
Okay.
He was born again in this, so he wrote, and the delegation was sent to America to go and meet with Bishop Turner. It comprised people like Reverend Kaba and Reverend Matatoani. And they went there. And then when they got to Wilberforce, to meet with Turner, they said to Turner, we would want to propose a merger with yourself. Our Ethiopian movement with the Amy Church should merge. Now, knowing Americans for their arrogance, they would not have that. They would not listen. They said, no, we are going to establish a church there. Forget about your movement. The Church of Jesus Christ is stronger than anything else, brethren. We are going to just establish church. People there still need a lot of evangelism and all that, So he sailed to South Africa in 1896, and in 1897 he held the first conference in Queenstown. But before he sailed here, he forced these guys to re-obligate the movement into the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Okay.
Now, re-obligation is not a measure.
What is it then?
It is a swallowing up. It means like we are re-obligating, we are giving our loyalty to you.
Okay.
You know, it's like an elephant being swallowed by a hare.
Okay.
Or a rabbit swallowing an elephant. Because if they were swallowing here an elephant,
A huge organization.
yes.
Okay.
Just because they wielded the flag church, they felt they were superior. So these guys, and they were swallowed. And when they came back, some squabbled that they were misrepresented. People like Reed, Naya, and so on, who were top in the Ethiopian movement, moved out and founded splinter groups of Ethiopian churches.
Okay.
So when you see Ethiopian churches in South Africa, they are not the Ethiopian movement. They were disgruntled groups who were not happy with Mukoni and what Charlotte had brought into the country. So they became Ethiopian churches. And when we were counting last time, there had been about 120 pieces of Ethiopian churches. Yeah,
Independent.
on their own. You understand? I don't know how many are united now, but there is a one strong Ethiopian church. I think its headquarters used to be at Orlando East in Soweto. And so, having done all this, a man called J.Z. Tansi, whose sons Yapi, James Yapi Tansi, had gotten a degree in America. Another son, Hansard, had got a degree, and he had another son, Nimrod, and he was a presiding elder of the new AME Church in Johannesburg, and he was a pastor at Kliptown, and he still had the mission of education in his heart. So he decided that, wow, I understand you can buy a piece of land out at Everton, south of Johannesburg. And they and his sons encouraged, all right. He had a daughter also, Grace, but Grace could have been very young then.
Okay.
So the history talks about sons only. Grace became Mrs. Rasekwala, who became a top activist in politics.
Okay.
I'll tell you more about it before we close, I suppose. So they bought a piece of land in Everton and established an institute there.
Okay.
The bishop who was then, it was Bishop Derrick. They called that institute Lillian Derrick Institute at Corner Bodia in Buffalo Road. Now, our people had a way of kowtowing to Americans, naming their buildings to Americans just because Americans will pour in money. You understand?
So that's when the name changed.
To what?
To Wilberforce.
It changed later.
Okay.
Charlotte, who had already been to Ramogopa in Leboa, her hometown, had established a primary school called Wilberforce Primary School.
Okay.
They asked her to come over to the Transvaal. So I don't know what happened to that primary school. So she came and called the institute Wilberforce Institute, influenced them to call it Wilberforce Institute.
This was because of she knew that this will bring in, I could say, international people to come in and support.
Part of that was that Wilberforce was already a powerful name in the world.
Okay.
And in history, William Wilberforce and then Wilberforce University. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
It was already a powerful name, could attract a lot of people.
Okay.
So, and they were very thankful for the education they got at Wilberforce University.
So that's why they wanted to go now.
That heritage.
Okay.
Yes. So it was called Wilberforce, opened in 1908.
Yes.
And because these people were already mesmerized, a lot of people in the Ethiopian movement people were already just nice churchmen, mesmerized by religion. They mocked Tansi. They said, how can you buy land? The land belongs to God. You cannot buy land. Even though on that land were to stand a monument called, Wilberforce Institute. And they were blind to that. In their myopia and jealousies, they mocked Tansi. But Tansi went ahead and Wilberforce staggered along for many years. It actually got recognized by the South African government only in 1949 that it was registered. Before then, from 1908, it suffered closures during the war. It suffered closures because of not having enough funds and so on. But they never left the legacy. They stood on, and Wilberforce stood still in the province of Transvaal. Yes, called according to their motto, our alma mater.
Okay.
In the province of Transvaal, glory is to thee. All right, now, glory is to thee. Now, this Wilberforce then, the idea of Ethiopia, why I'm saying it gave rise to liberation thought in Africa as well. That's when, after the Ethiopian movement, one of the South Africans who were influenced by Ethiopian movement but never left the Ethiopian church, Enoch Sontonga, composed the anthem.
Yes, the national anthem of South Africa.
The past national anthem of South Africa. This one is diluted. The real one.
Okay, the original one.
Original one.
Okay.
And so Sontonga composed Nkosi Sikelel Africa. And Nkosi Sikelel Africa got to be sung in many countries like Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Botswana. You understand what
So this was even before?
It was during that period, around that period. Yes, they adopted that as well as their national anthem. And but the Ethiopian movement had to suffer more setbacks because they were pushed back. They could not be resuscitated, especially when these young men from America came back with education, graduates and so on, tails, wearing tails as graduates and all that. And you had from the Congregational Church, a missionary church as well, people like Langalibalele Dube, who was the first president of the African Native National Congress, present ANC, and Priestley Kaseme, who made a famous speech, I'm an African, at the Columbia University in New York when he was graduating. And that was later plagiarized by this man called Thabo Mbeki. And so this man, these people also decided that we're taking the cultures on our own. You folk, you are old, you are not so educated, and the old man sat back, and the Ethiopian movement died a natural death.
So what is
was to get the dignity of the indigenous people back. It was like Black consciousness movement of the time, with a mix of Pan-Africanism in it. Yes, because it was going to stretch throughout Africa. And it did stretch throughout Africa because Abyssinia, when it had won the war in 1941, immediately called itself Ethiopia, having been influenced by this movement that came out of South Africa. Because Ethiopia then was a word used only by foreigners. People were Abyssinia, we were Lesotho, we were Natal.
Was South Africa still called Tanzania, or it was still South Africa? Oh, so it's like Southern Africa.
Covered part of Africa.
Okay.
Like Ethiopia also covered number of countries that ultimately broke away from it.
Okay.
But it was called Abyssinia.
Okay.
Now they went and adopted this name Ethiopia just like Africans always allowed to be named by others, I don't subscribe to the name Africa myself or Akebulen, because it was either named by the Greek, by the Arabians and whatnot. We never had an opportunity to name ourselves. But no, it was not like Africa was the whole motherland. Before they were cut into pieces, they didn't even see themselves as a continent. It was the land of human origin. And that is why I call it the motherland. So others call it African.
Would you say that it was called Mother of Mankind?
Let me tell you what it was called. Mm-hmm. There were people who would have portions of motherland, or Nubia, Kemet, and such.
Yes.
And in the south, you would have Mapungungwe, you would have Lesotho. People were comfortable with those identities. It was not a matter of being African. Most people started calling themselves African when these young men educated abroad came and said, "We are Africans, we are Africans." And a man called W.E.B. Du Bois began to propagate Pan-Africanism.
So, which is
it was Du Bois with people like Wanengu. Yes.
So Du Bois was he African?
He was an African American.
Okay.
Yes. A very sharp scholar. And I don't fault them for calling us Africans because the white masters were calling us Africans. But we need to revisit that. And because for instance, if you go to Germany, you don't go there and say to a German person, "Hi, European." Why should you come here and say, "Hi, African"? You say, "Hey, you German, eh? German." You understand what I mean? Mm-hmm. British is British. Why should we be called African? You understand what I mean? Yes. It is because we were told we were Africans. You know, that's a subject for another day. But I'm tempted to say these things because Abyssinia, which meant a crucible of nations, hotspots of nations where nations settled, also became very religious. And especially Christianity dominated many areas of that area. And also they were enticed by the word Ethiopia as well. So in 1941 they began to call themselves Ethiopia. So who should not say South Africa had influenced the naming of Abyssinia into Ethiopia? Because we are the one who enhanced it.
Yes, who embraced it first.
Enhanced it.
Okay.
Yes. Embraced it, you can use that word.
Okay.
Yes. And so even I still bow to the Ethiopian movement because I was not there to tell them what to call it.
Yes.
And they were Bible students. They had heard that Africa the continent was called Ethiopia.
Yes.
So maybe they were reverting to calling the whole continent Ethiopia.
Which is quite interesting.
But they would still be named by others because Ethiopia is a Greek word, simply means those of burnt skins. Burnt by the sun. Burnt, they actually say burnt skins. It has no synonym. Burnt skins. I mean, those people are ruthless. They didn't say you are burnt. That's why when they come to bathing, what do they call it again?
Sunbathing.
Sunbathing. You understand what I mean?
Yes.
Yes. So those people, they're burning their own skins now, trying to burn them. You understand what I mean? So they said we were people of band skills. And so, you know what I mean? That's why I'm saying, I mean, if I were to start a movement now, I would not go back and recall the word Ethiopia and call it, I'm more enlightened. I would call it something else. But the Ethiopian movement started like you would start an NGO that began to stretch throughout the country and became popular and registered and fought for the rights of people. But because religion is bewitching, they had to keep religion in there because they needed people to sing hymns, they needed people to bow down and pray, they needed people to clap hands. You understand what I mean?
So would you say that was a bad idea, or it was not a good idea, like to like I could say infuse African indigenous traditions with religious beliefs?
Infused, you use the word infused. In the 80s, the Roman Catholic Church Pope then said the Roman Catholic Church must, what is the word again? It must inculturate, which means it must come into the cultures of Africa and embrace them. Whereas the right word should have been acculturate, which means we should have said to the gospel, protagonists, and say, listen, Yeshua was a Hebrew young man. How would we look at him as Africans? Totally. Not that we must try to say Yeshua is a chief ancestor of Africans. That is a distortion. To say, where would Joshua put in the context of the motherland? That's why one Professor Gabriel Sitilon said, religion is bewitching. And he said, religion is bewitching. And he stayed in the Methodist Church. And when they asked him, he was an Africanist theologian of high standard. He said, I'm still in the church because it is bewitching. But he was acculturating the traditions of the church into his local church. He was a pastor at Costa. He used to slaughter for the ancestors there in his church. He did a lot of things. And he understood Jesus as would be a Sanusi of some kind. A Ngaka. A big medicine man or big healer. That's not medicine man this time, but healer. A big healer within the context of the continent. Understand? So that's why you have the Amadodana way of singing, having captured most of the imagination of especially mainline churches. Because people have gone back to acculturate music, to say we are not going to sit there and say, Holy, holy, Lord God. No, they're not going to sing like that. In staff notation, they're going to say, no,
So that's the one. They're embracing their Africanness.
Oh yes, expressing it to God, because Africans, people of the motherland, have never been atheists. They've always believed in the power from on high.
Yes.
And religion has messed them up.
So what you say has it brought people closer to God, or has it separated them from God?
It has pushed people away from God. It's like politics.
In what sense? Like, what are some of the things that you could say, like influence people, what would you say, are some of the things that religion has done, to separate people from God, pretty much?
it introduced their own cultures. Like the British would come with the Presbyterian Church, all incorporating the British way of worship and everything else. For instance, when the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, with her late husband, visited Cape Town, Archbishop Tutu then was still Archbishop. He made a joke at the St. George's Cathedral. And he had to apologize to the Queen to say, I apologize for making a joke in the cathedral. Now, African people are humorous people. We always spice and garnish our talk with humor and satire. And we know how to do it, we know how to control it. It's not vulgar. But the stiff upper lip that the British are, they will never allow to make the slightest joke and laugh in the church. So Tutu had to apologize. Can you imagine? So that is the kind of slave to a strong man that we all honor and love. But he has been enslaved in his own chains. That's right. That's why you had the Shembe Church, you have the ZCC, the Christian Church, which expresses their religion outside of the format of the colonial powers. You know, you can, they call them religion, but most of them are just, you know, above religion. The spiritual churches, there are spiritual churches that were formed here in Everton, like the St. John's, founded by Mother Christine Nuku. Very big spiritual church, where people get more healing and so on. So it is not confined to the tenets and the dogmas of the so-called Mother Church. And there's no inspector who comes to look at you and find out how are you worshiping. As a parting shot, a young man from Ghana went to England to study theology. When he came back, he came to church. He found people there. He came with a white man to church. And then he was showing like this man, you know, as a tourist, but in church. So he was a fellow theologian, a fellow clergyman. So the Ghanaians began to dance in the church and took off their shoes and so on. And this guy who had been studying in England had always sometimes come to church and never did any dancing, never took off his shoes. He was a straight-jacketed gentleman who could not do those heathen things. But the white man saw these people moving like that. And when he saw these people moving like that, he took off his shoes, the white man, and began to dance and began to clap his hands. Only then did the nigger join him. You understand what I mean? Okay. Just like Helen Kuzwa once said, don't play second fiddle to anybody. And when I was interrogated by the special branch of the party in 1969 for the first time, it was because I had written a letter to the editor of the World newspaper then. And I had said, I had supported Helen Kuzwa that you don't play second fiddle to anybody. I was very young. I was taken in by police to go and be question, where did I meet Kuzwa and all that jazz? And I had never seen her in Adam, in Eve. I had never seen her. You understand what I mean? Yeah. So we always took our cue from others instead of also finding out, because our memory was also washed. A lot of memory is gone. All what is left, we are left with, is that I'm a Presbyterian, I'm a Catholic, I'm an Anglican, I'm a Dutch Reform. And this still divides children of one mother. You understand what I mean? So, Father,
mother.
Yeah, you are being gender correct.
Yeah.
Yes, which is fair. But in language, we use mother most of the time. The children of the that's
of Africa.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. They are not called the children of the Lord of their father. Although in Zululand they say Mina Wesende Ligampande, which means I come from the testicles of Mpande.
The father.
Okay. Which means they're more on the patriarchal.
Yes.
But the Basotho people, whom I'm more closer to, they say Banabam.
Okay. So in conclusion then, because of obviously I would like to share a bit of my understanding when it comes to religion and also tradition. Because of in my understanding, like we are all here in this universe and we all come from like a single source. I think the confusion comes when now people back then, since the 19th century, started to discover new worlds. So they had their beliefs and like they had their own interpretation of how they know God or how they like perceive God. Okay. Yeah, we can like. Yeah. Yes.
And I was going to conclude how the Ethiopian movement proteges kept on influencing events in South Africa. For instance, Prince Tansi, who became Cresswell Sequoia, became one of the top leaders of the anti-apartheid education community schools, which were organized in Alexandras, in the East Rand, and so on. And her brother, Nimrod, because he did not just become a religious puppet, joined the ANC, and he was the secretary of the ANC in the Transvaal, and at one time is president. So it was not all terrible loss. Some could still be retrieved. Although they were then in political organizations, which organizations have reached their sell-by date. Yes, politics will soon be out of South Africa to start with. South Africa will start again to lead the world by cancelling out politics.
Like politics as a whole or as a particular political party?
No, not political party. Politics. Because politics and politicians are the same. Are the people who hunger for power. They don't know the principles of governance of this motherland, and they are not allowing the professors and the academics to help us recover modes of governance of the motherland. They are stuck with the Westminster system. They are stuck with quarreling opposition parties which do not serve any purpose but personal purposes of achieving power and control. So we remain puppets of politicians who you know that are very ruthless and have proved themselves to be very ruthless. So their time is up. Up. And that's why you have groupings coming up of young people now, and like Operation Tutula, and you might not subscribe to them. I don't know much about them yet, but the good thing is that they are saying we are not a political movement, and those are the signs that we are moving out of this thing called politics. Political era. And we must not shy off from leading the world from that perspective, because a lot of governance in the whole world was learned out of the ways of Africa, out of the laws and precepts of law in South Africa, on the mother continent. I still use the word Africa because it is still on my tongue.
Yes.
But may the good power from on high wipe it once and for all one day from my tongue.
Okay.
And I must just refer to this as motherland.
Motherland.
By the way, even the great Marcus Garvey movement of around 1922 to 24 or more is a child of the Ethiopian movement.
Mm-hmm.
It came after the Ethiopian movement, was influenced by the Ethiopian movement. That's why I'm saying South Africa always influenced in international liberation agenda,
yes.
Even in the diaspora. But then South Africa itself is a mother of humanity. Most fossils were found of humans and other animals were found in South Africa more than anywhere in the world.
Much depth on this topic, especially on obviously the link between the government and also the kernel of mankind pretty much in South Africa.
Can I interrupt?
Mm-hmm.
I was in Brazil in 2009, and I was teaching young people about the liberation history of South Africa. And I told them that the Garden of Eden is actually in Gauteng, at the kernel of mankind. And this young man of mixed blood was so revolted, but I was not surprised. Only one young man in that under the tree where I was teaching, when I was sharing with them, was so revolted, and others had to come on her trauma. You know, it was like, who's this nigger coming here to say humankind started in Africa and in this area of Gauteng and so on? But even theologians need to revisit the story of the Garden of Eden.